Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever it is for you. Welcome back to another Division 2 video. My name is Prime and today I'm gonna show you the builds that you can use with the Ouroboros for the Incursion. Of course, we're talking about Striker, but there are a few builds you can use per enemy or per boss area, and I'm gonna show you all those builds today. And at the end I might show you a few alternatives if you do not have the gear yet, or what the best you can go for. Everybody and their mom already uploaded this build. There are a few builds out there that might be different, but most of them are the same. I'm not gonna lie to you, but I still got a lot of questions from my community, which builds I run, and especially with that Ouroboros, how we can do so much damage. Of course, it's the Incursion, so you will see damage numbers that you get boosted by the team as well, but that's of course the challenge. Getting together with that team composition to do the most damage and beam those bosses down. As you can see in the background, me and my team beaming down right and then just running through the lovebirds. I'm gonna show you those builds that we use and even some tips and tricks to even do more damage with your whole team. But enough intro, enough gameplay. Let's dive right into the builds and let me show you what we use and pretty much what everybody uses within the Incursion if you got this beautiful Ouroboros to drop. And this is the main build I'm gonna show you. This is hands down the best build that you can run around with. There are a few other builds, of course, that I'm gonna show you, but they are just for particular bosses, especially for the lovebirds. So starting with this build and starting with the specialization as usual, I'm using the firewall specialization, but my team uses different specializations. So make sure that you talk to your team about the setups of your specializations. This will give you a lot more damage output and even more survivability. I made a video about that. I will leave it on the screen right now. Go check it out if you want to know a little bit more about the bonuses and what you should run with your team as a specialization. Why am I running the firewall specialization? For that striker shield. This will give us a lot more damage output, as teammates are standing behind me will get this damage buff as well, but I will talk about it whenever we reach the skills. Jumping over, of course, to the Ouroboros. We all know this beautiful thing. This is unlockable behind the Incursion. It's locked behind the Incursion. This is the only way to get it, and believe me, it is worth the grind. So if you're still looking for people to help out, jump over to Twitch/IamPurePrime. Hit me up with a follow. We help people daily, or at least 5 times a week from Tuesday until Saturday. This Ouroboros is at expertise level 22, 101.9k damage. Almost 1700 RPM because of the strikers and a mag of 50, and go for the attribute damage you target out of cover on there. For my secondary, and you want to go for this gun especially for the stacks. This has nothing to do with doing damage. This is just keeping your stacks up from the striker, and that is my favorite, the rock and roll, the named ACS-12. Why this gun and not the lefty? Because this comes with 10 more bullets in the mag, a total of 30, and I chose to go for rate of fire as the attribute on there. It gives me a little bit more rate of fire of that 5%, but every bit helps. As we know, this is kind of a DPS check, and you wanna keep your strikers at optimal damage output all the time, and that's why the rock and roll will be your best choice, as of course that perfect extra comes in, and that's why we have those extra 10 bullets in the mag. For the pistol, doesn't matter what you go for, just choose a pistol that you, for example, don't have proficient yet. It will save you materials and pieces to donate. Then over to the setup of the build. We all know strikers and what it does, so go over it real quick. Weapon handling, rate of fire, but we're doing it for the strikers gamble. scramble, giving us up to 200% weapon damage, because that is what this setup gives you. Of course, we're losing stacks per second, and that's why we're using the rock and roll, because you can still get those stacks up on people that are immune. For example, the right boss. If he gets guided around to the shower, you can just get your ACS out and get your stacks up on the enemy to make sure that your strikers is an optimal damage all the time. Backpack and chest piece. Why? As I explained, we're gaining up to that 200% extra weapon damage, as the backpack increases the 0.65% to 1%, and the chest piece raises it from 100 to 200 stacks, and that's why we can do 200% extra weapon damage. Everything on this build and builds forward will all be built toward critical hit chance and critical hit damage. Depending on your team setup, always try to build toward that 50% critical hit chance, so you will always reach that cap of 60% critical hit chance to gain the most damage output possible on your build. Chest piece, critical hit damage mod. Holster, critical hit damage on there. Knee pads, critical hit chance to make sure that I reach that 50 to 52% critical hit chance. For my backpack, critical hit damage and critical hit damage mod. And then of course my mask, the Coyote's mask. Why the Coyote's mask? Because this comes with the pack instincts. Of course this comes again with the attributes that we're looking for: critical hit chance, critical hit damage mod on there. And this gives us a boost up to 35% critical hit damage and 35% critical hit chance. But it's not always the case, so make sure that you talk to your teammates who is running Coyote's masks. You can run 3 Coyote's masks in the first area and maybe even the second area, but within the Lovebirds and with Right you can use 2 masks, or even on the Lovebirds just 1 mask, because most of the damage will be within that 15 meters as you are in the faces of the Lovebirds. So make sure to communicate with your team who's using what. That's why we're using the Coyote's mask, to gain an extra critical hit chance that everybody is on their cap of 60%, reaching the maximum damage output just like we're doing with strikers. Then the last piece on this first build will be the Contractor's gloves. This will give us 8% damage to armor. Again, rolled critical hit damage on there, and of course everything is red on this build. No yellow cores, no blue cores, full DPS, full damage. That's pretty much the first setup of the build. Of course, for the striker shield, we are gaining an extra 12 or 11%. It is very strange. Sometimes it jumps up to 12% and sometimes it stays on 11. So think about 11 if you have the correct mods for it, of course. And this is per enemy. So of course, if you're beaming down those Lovebirds, if they're standing in the buff range of that 10 meters of your shield, you will gain extra 22% bonus damage, and even for your teammates standing behind you. What you want to go for the mods are extra damage bonus. I have 2 on here, one from 1% and one from 5%. This is the max you can find, and then I chose to go for an 8% active regeneration, or you could go for an extra shield health. That will help out a lot as well. And that's why I am using the firewall for this firewall striker shield on my team's setup. And then for the secondary skill, we're going for the Reviver Hive. Why? Of course, this gives us an extra life, and it helps out a lot because if your teammates need to pick you up, those are a lot of precious seconds as you can get taken out. I'm not talking about that you're doing a speed run, but the ads will aggro you, and if you're picking somebody up, that will result in probably 2 deaths on the team instead of that 1. So make sure to run around with that Reviver Hive. Go for the max out mods that you have. I went for 10% Reviver Armor Repair, 5% range, and 10% health on the mods. So going over the stats real quick, and this is mainly what you want to go for. It's 53% critical hit chance and 151% critical hit damage, 70% headshot damage, 8% damage to armor, and of course that extra 10% damage to targets out of cover from our gun itself. So this is the setup of the main build. Let's jump over to the other build, and this build is mainly used on the lovebirds, and that is the setup with the bloody knuckles. And why the bloody knuckles? And this is quite interesting, as if you smack somebody or throw a grenade, you will gain an extra 25% weapon damage with the talent Over the Top. It reads, damaging an enemy with a grenade or striking an enemy with a melee attack activates Seeing Red. Seeing Red grants 25% weapon damage and 100% to melee damage. Seeing Red lasts 20 seconds and has a 60-second cooldown after completion. You can reset this as well, but we're mainly using it for that extra 20 seconds of weapon damage buff of 25%. And just make sure for this setup of the build that you change a few things. Like I changed away from the Coyote's mask as I'm running around with those bloody knuckles. Again, make sure to communicate that with your team who is using that Coyote's mask, because that is an extra 25% critical hit damage. And then for my knee pads, I changed to Grupo, and that will give us an extra critical hit damage. And then over to the stats, this will be 53% critical hit chance, 178% critical hit damage, 70% headshot damage, and then of course that 10% damage to target out of cover from our weapon itself. And this is just the main setup that people are using. I changed it to the lefty as well because I like to throw that grenade instead of striking it. So if we don't have that perfect sledgehammer active yet, then I will make sure that this will be activated, because this is another extra boost that you can do for your team, but mainly somebody else is doing it, mainly the healer on our setup, because the perfect sledgehammer will give you so much extra damage as well, and some minus 30% movement speed that will help out, especially on those lovebirds. And this is mainly the setup that you want to use on the lovebirds. Again, talk to your teammates what the best setup is, what your other teammates are using, and not that you're all using the same and that you're missing damage output. As I said at the intro, you can do up to 3 to 5 million damage with these setups, especially if your team dynamic is fully to the max and you're using everything to optimize your damages. So then I have a few alternative builds if you do not have, for example, that Coyote's mask. So we're going back to the first build. If you have that Ouroboros to drop, if you got lucky or you have got it handed, we gave away 10 Ouroboroses in our community already. It is a lovely sight to see people being so happy to gaining this awesome exotic. But if you don't have the Coyote's mask, you probably want to go for Grupo mask. And why the Grupo mask? Because this will still give you that extra critical hit damage. So just make sure that you change your mods. Make sure that you keep it on critical hit damage, what we had on the Coyote's mask. Change it up, and this is what you want to go for if you do not have that Coyote's mask. And then jumping over the stats real quick, of course the critical hit chance will be the same, but the critical hit damage is raised a little bit. And again, talk to your teammates. If your teammates have that Coyote's mask already active, this might be even a better setup. But then of course make sure that you know what your teammates are running around with and that you at least are using 2 or 1 Coyote's mask at the end. But this is another setup that you can use if you don't have that Coyote's mask. But as I said at the beginning, this is just straight up, hands down, the best build you can go for, that you probably already seen a lot of other people talk about. A lot of people in my community ask me to show the setups of the builds and how we like to run it. Most of people run it this way, and these are the setups that we use, or the alternative setups that you can use if you don't have particular setups of the builds. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you very much if you stick till the end. You are a freaking legend if you still here. Let me know in the comments down below what kind of setup that you like to run. Do you have that Ouroboros already? And what is your fastest time if you want to go for that, of course. Let me know in the comments down below. And again, if you need help, jump over to Twitch. From Tuesday to Saturday, we love to help out the community. Twitch/IamPurePrime. I will see you there. But for today, if you like the video, like the video. If it helped you out in any way or form, if you're new here, you want to be updated about the Division 2 and the future Division 3, make sure to subscribe as well. And I will see you in the next video. PurePrime out.